Our first presentation is by Fyza Parviz from Stanford University, who will be sharing her work, how John Greaves read his Ulugh Beg. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. And sorry, everyone. Good morning, first of all. Sorry, I have a sore throat, but I'll do my best to make sure I'm clear. And it's wonderful to present my research with you. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, my title of my talk is How John Greaves, who was a 17th century scholar, read his Ulugh Beg, who was a 15th century astronomer from the Islamic world. So the title of my talk comes from a seminal paper by Lisa Jardine and Anthony Grafton titled How Gabriel Harvey Read His Livy. And Gabriel Harvey was an early modern scholar, and Livy obviously is a classic scholar. So it's resulted in a lot of literature that came out on how X read Y, how an early modernist read a classic scholar. And the findings that Jardine and Grafton came out in their article was that early modern readers were actually interpreting the classical texts they were studying. They read them actively rather than passively, meaning that they were annotating and taking notes in the manuscripts or in the copies of the classical works. And they read in order to, and this is a famous phrase of theirs, give rise to something else. So their reading were not just, for their own self, they were because of a larger project that they were working on. And so, like I said, there's a lot of literature that came out. And I talked to Dr. Grafton, and he also confirmed that there's no one who's looked at how an early modern Europeanist read a classic scholar from the Islamic world. So this is my contribution to this literature, and I'm happy to present my work here. So the agenda for today's talk, I will first go over a brief bio of John Greaves. I'll talk about his manuscript collection and his interest in Ulugh Beg. And in interest in Ulugh Beg, I look at his reading practices, Greaves's projects, and especially the two projects that I'm interested in, his translation and new edition of Ulugh Beg's work, and also a world map that he was working on, taking data from Ulugh Beg's works. Okay, so John Greaves's bio. So he was the third Gresham Professor of Geometry. He was the first English astronomer to travel to the Near East. He traveled to Constantinople, Alexandria, and Cairo. He had many reasons for his travels, but I'm mostly interested in his astronomical practices. So he was there to acquire manuscripts, astronomical manuscripts from the Islamic world, bring them back to England, and in particular to the Bodleian Library. And he was also there to conduct astronomical observations. He later became the second civilian professor of astronomy at Oxford. He was a polyglot and polymath. Like I said, he had many projects. He knew many languages, or in his trips, he was also acquiring languages. And his collection then became part of the Bodleian Library. So I'm talking about the Greaves manuscript collection. So my research is part of an Oxford project called Arabic Books and Astronomy in 17th Century Oxford. And the principal investigators are Dr. Julia Bray, who's the Laudian Professor of Arabic at Oxford. And part of the project is that we've been digitizing the archival materials and astronomical instruments that are related to John Greaves. These collections are at the Bodleian Library, at the St. John's College Library, at the Oxford History of Science Museum, and at some Stanford Library as well. And we've been able to digitize a majority of the materials and make them accessible to everyone. I've also uploaded the photos that our project team has taken on Stanford and Oxford repositories. So if you go to the digital Bodleian website and try to find one of the manuscripts in Greaves's collection, you'll be able to find very nice editions that are digitized by Bodleian Library themselves. They're IIIF high quality images. So this is really like a great step for researching all the archival materials, manuscripts that are part of Greaves' collection at Bodleian and St. John's College. So what were some of the works from Arabic and Persian astronomy that were of interest to Greaves and also to early modern astronomers of his period. So one clue we can find is a letter that Greaves sent to one of his peers back in England from Constantinople in 1638. And in this letter, he talks about that he's been looking for Arabic and Turkish books. And he says, I ventured into the shops where the Turks sell them. He ventured himself into the shops and he found them at excessive prices, but then still he was able to find, the copies that he was really looking for, because he had, sufficient money to disperse. And what were those copies? He says, Abul Fida, his geography in Arabic, and Ulugh Beg, his canons and astronomical tables in Persian. So these were two really important works that were all the early modern, as from my research, were trying to study, we're trying to find, and we're trying to translate and produce editions of. And then he says, yes, he says in his letter, he says, I hope I'll be able to publish them if I find better masters. So then in Greaves's manuscript collection, we do find Ulugh Beg, Sij Sultani, and Abul Fida's Taqwim al-Buldan, the two texts that he was searching for in the markets. For Ulugh Beg, we have a manuscript in Persian in Bodleian and a manuscript in Arabic in St. John's College Library. And these are the two that I will be showcasing in today's talk. So first of all, who's Ulugh Beg that they're all interested in? So Ulugh Beg was a prince, and he was an astronomer prince. He lived in 1394 to 1449. He established an observatory in Samarkand, and my background is actually an image of what that observatory looked like. And he was able to attract some of the best mathematicians and astronomers from the Islamic world at this observatory. And what they were doing was they were observing the heavens. They had one of the best instruments, and they produced the most accurate star catalog of this period. And actually, it was one of the most accurate till the 17th century. And that catalog was called Zij Sultani, the Sultan Star Table. And it not only included a map of the heavens, but also it included location data, a lot of other precise information that was interest to early modern scholars. Right. So let's look at Greaves' reading practices and his annotations in his Ulugh Beg manuscripts. So this is a folio from St. John's College MS 91, which is an Arabic manuscript. Anchor text is in Arabic, and we see that in the first few pages, Greaves has copiously annotated in different languages. We have Latin, and we have some Arabic. And what's interesting is the number one point is that what he's annotated are extracts from another work. So what he's written is a text from Al-Farghani, who is also an Islamic astronomer, geographer. And he has taken a Latin translation of Al-Farghani's work and has added that in his Ulugh Beg's manuscript. And the texts are, what he's annotated is related to what is written in the anchor text in the Arabic. It's talking about epochs, and Greaves was interested in chronology, so it's talking about chronology. So this is also really interesting because, and he's written it in a very neat handwriting, so it's not only notes for himself to refer to as he's studying the Ulugh Beg manuscript, but also if his peers who would be interested in looking at this manuscript but don't have necessary Arabic language skills could read then the Latin text that's associated with this Arabic text. Second, we see is that he, in the first few pages, the empty pages of this manuscript, he's added some Arabic technical terms for how to use an astrolabe. And he says that this Sadil Makus, as my master at Cairo pronounced it, which means that he was reading this manuscript in Cairo with probably an astronomer, a master who knew the text well, and Greaves was, understanding how as Islamic instruments worked, and was adding that information in this text as he was studying this text, and then adding information for himself. So this is really interesting as well, that he was using it as his student copy with his notes. The other interesting thing we notice is that if you see, he's underlined certain words in this particular folio, and then he's actually on the side, the margin, he is stating the same word, but a different spelling. So either he's correcting the spellings, and this is his MS Greaves 5, which is a Persian text. He's either correcting the spellings, so this means that he probably had another Persian copy of this manuscript that he was correlating with, and then he was comparing and contrasting the words, because this is also a way for him to learn the languages, Arabic and Persian, by reading these texts and comparing different texts together and seeing what differences he found. And similarly, we see that, again, he's highlighted certain terms, underlined them, and on the top, we see that he has produced Latin translations of those terms. So again, showcasing technical terms that he doesn't know, sometimes even very simple things like a simple Arabic preposition, and he's highlighting and putting a Latin translation. So this was his way of learning the Arabic and Persian languages. And it is a difficult way, of course, to learn a language, but this was his way to acquire this skill. Another thing that he's doing, and we see, is that he's extracting data from these manuscripts. So we see again in the margin, he's extracting location data. And then we find in one of his notebooks, and at the top he says that this is from Ulugh Beg's tables, which means that he's taken, and this is location data, latitude and longitude of all cities that are listed in Ulugh Beg's work, and he's putting all that list in his notebook. So he's collecting, extracting information from this manuscript. So then why is he doing all this? What are his projects that he's interested in that would result, that would help him in studying Ulugh? Well, first of all, he wanted to produce his own publication of Ulugh Beg. Like I mentioned, early modern scholars were really seeking translation of Ulugh Beg's work, and there wasn't a Latin translation available at the time. Greaves was the first to produce an Arabic a Latin translation, and his work was called Canicularia, published in 1648, and it had both the Latin on one end, one page, the Arabic in the other, so you could compare. And this was actually the first printed work in Arabic from England. So he actually got the typeset made for this text. So it was a big endeavor that he was part of to England, England's first published Arabic text. Greaves was also interested in creating maps, and he wanted to create accurate maps, which is why he was doing astronomical observations in the Near East. And this map that we found in his archives is a manuscript map, meaning that it's still in his handwritten form with the grid drawn by himself, and it never went into publication because Greaves died right after. But it's 14 pages long. It covers all of the Near Eastern, and actually it's a map of the world. And in particular, if we look closely, he talks about Constantinople here, and according to Ulugh Beg and Ptolemy, so two works that he was studying very closely, they claim that Constantinople is at 45 degrees in their works, but Greaves, from his own observations, has found that it is 41 degrees 6 minutes. Sorry, it's not completely accurate, his calculation, but it's closer to what was then found to be the correct latitude for Constantinople. So he's also studying those texts to compare his own astronomical observations and then correct them. So what are my conclusions? So looking at how Greaves was studying these manuscripts, he kind of fits the profile of that active early modern scholar and reader defined by Jardin and Grafton in their article. Greaves was an active reader of Arabic and Persian astronomical works, and we see that from his annotations, from his projects, and he fits this definition that he was reading in order to give rise to something else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you. Are there any questions for our speaker?
Chris?
Yes. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Fyza. Really, really cool stuff. The interest in the Arabic world and knowledge coming out of their history of scholarship in the West is really fascinating. There's a longer history of this in the natural sciences, particularly with interest in Arabic medicine. So Andrea Alpago and Girolamo Ramuzio in the 15teens, 20s even, and maybe the late 1400s, learned when they were traveling, working for the Venetian government in, I think, Aleppo and places like that, and learned Arabic in the process and brought back manuscripts of Avicenna and things like that, because they used them and they were introduced to the medical school, which was the key part of the University of Padua, which was basically Venetian Empire's home university, because they didn't have a university in Venice proper. And unlike most, it wasn't a university primarily geared towards studying religion, philosophy, or the law, but natural philosophy and medicine was at its forefront. So it's kind of cool to see Greaves kind of following along that same path, because other than medicine, other key things were Arabic studies of mathematical, geometrical, and astronomical texts that were a lot of times based on built or revised and annotated versions of Euclid and things like that, and Ptolemy. So Arab knowledge is really kind of fascinating for the Western world, and the trick is always figuring out how to get access to it. So what I'm interested in, one thing I wanted to ask you was, you mentioned Greaves' effort to try and like annotate this manuscript and publish it. And as you were talking, two things popped up, which I thought was something the audience might not really be aware of. When you're talking about Greaves annotating that manuscript, that's a Persian manuscript, right? We have multiple letters. There's 32 letters in Farsi and only 28 in Arabic and only 26 in English. I took Farsi for a year. It was really hard because the same sound can be spelled with multiple letters in Farsi. And that's really tough for an American and a non-native speaker. So that was always kind of fascinating. So I think it might be interesting is he's trying to probably, just like any person analyzing a manuscript for press, making sure it's accurate, improving its correctness. But there could also be interesting problems between the use of words that are adopted Arabic words into Persian and vice versa, because they have different alphabets. And then the next thing I thought was interesting and I wanted to ask you about was your thoughts on, you said he had his own type cut. There had been a couple of earlier publications in England, I think, but I know one of the things I studied was the Medici family sponsored an Arabic press in Rome in the 1580s. They published some of the first books, but they were interesting interlinear translations of Italian and Latin printed on the same page, and they had special type cut. I think it was Robert Grandjean did the type. And I was wondering if there's any connection to that, because that kind of died on the vine. They published like 2 projects, everything. They sat in a warehouse, and then he went to become Grand Duke after he left when his brother died, and they never published anything else again.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chris. I mean, there's so many things. Yes, the Medici Oriental Press, I'm very much aware of it. Actually, I came to Greaves through doing research on a manuscript in Stanford Library's collection that was published by Medici Press. And yeah, they first published, the press opened in 1590. I mean, that's when they first published, 1594. And Arabic they started with Arabic scientific manuscripts with Avicenna, like you said. Tusi's rendition of Euclid was the one that I researched, and yeah, that press shut down. But it's really interesting because Greaves, during his travels, he was on a hunt to buy a type, and that's why he was sent to Leiden. This was his second trip abroad, and he went to Leiden and he got the type from them. They sold it to him. He brought it back to Oxford, and then he corrected it, stole it then from Oxford, and then went and published this. This was, the 1648 Carnicularia was the first one published in England in Arabic. So yeah, so it's really interesting. It is all connected because the Leiden people had also taken it from the Medici, so it's like it's a continuation. They were all interested, but as you know, the Medici press also had a lot of errors in the manuscript, which is why they wanted to sell it to the Ottoman Empire. They're like, we don't want this, too many errors. And yeah, so it's a fascinating story on how they're all connected. And England, politically wants to become the next power, like, even geographically, but also scholarly, they want to be the next, place where people can come for scholarship, and they want to compete with Leiden, which was then the center. And you're right, everybody, medicine was like the primary focus when they were initially became interested in Arabic scholarship. Greaves' brother was a doctor. He was the doctor, actually became a physician for King Charles, and he was sent to Leiden to also study Arabic medicine and stuff. And actually, it all started in this.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
We're out of time.